When life or the divine chooses to shape a man into something greater, it doesn't begin with applause, with wealth, or with crowns. It begins with silence, with subtraction, with stripping away everything that once made him feel secure. At first, it feels like abandonment. The man notices that the doors he once walked through easily begin to close. The people who once cheered for him fade into the distance. The path he thought was his future crumbles beneath his feet. And in the rawness of that emptiness, he feels invisible, forgotten, unwanted. But this is not neglect. This is preparation. A man who is meant for power cannot be built on soft ground. His roots must go deep, and deep roots require pressure, require storms, require solitude. A tree with shallow roots falls in the first strong wind, but one that has been tested, pressed into the earth, can stand unmoved when the storm rages. The divine does not crown a man in front of kings until first it has stripped him before the mirror. He must see himself without his masks, without charm, without wealth, without titles or reputation, for only then can he discover who he really is. Power without transformation becomes poison. A man who gains influence before he gains depth will eventually be destroyed by the very thing he holds. And so, the fires come, not to burn him into ashes, but to burn away everything false, everything fragile, everything that was never truly him. Loneliness, then, is not punishment. It is initiation. Silence is not absence. It is instruction. The wilderness is not exile. It is the classroom where a man learns the lessons he could never learn surrounded by noise. And in that solitude, something shifts. At first, the silence feels unbearable. But slowly, beneath the roar of old fears and the chatter of the mind, another sound emerges. A still, steady pulse. A wordless knowing. A rhythm deeper than thought, older than time. For the first time, the man hears not the world, but life itself. It feels ancient, this presence within him, untouched by doubt, untouched by the opinions of others. He realizes that the divine rarely speaks in thunder. More often it whispers, in the stillness. The world may call him broken, but he is not broken. He is unfinished. The world may call him weak, but he is waiting. And in that waiting, a new kind of strength is born. Not the kind built on muscle or noise, but the kind that comes from presence. From knowing that even in the void, he is held. Even in the storm, there is purpose. A powerful man is not the one who bends the world to his will. He is the one who can stand still while the world spins around him. He does not need to dominate to prove his strength. He knows that vulnerability is not weakness, it is simply truth without armor. And truth, when unshackled, cannot be shaken. Slowly, the pieces of his life return, but not as they were. What comes back is purified. What remains is only what matters. His circle of relationships shrinks, but those that remain grow deeper. His definition of success simplifies, but it becomes richer, more meaningful. His confidence no longer depends on possessions or applause or titles. It flows from within, from who he has become. When life shapes a man for power, it begins by breaking him open, not to destroy him, but to pour something eternal inside. Not power as the world defines it, not control or fame or dominance, but clarity, stillness, purpose, an authority rooted not in fear, but in understanding. He no longer needs to shout to be heard. His presence alone makes others listen. He no longer chases approval, yet people are drawn to him. He no longer tries to leave a mark, yet every step he takes leaves a deep impression. He has met the fire, and though it once burned, now he carries only its warmth. So if you find yourself in a season of isolation, alone, uncertain, undone, maybe you are not lost, maybe you are being forged. Maybe the silence around you is not emptiness, but the breath of the divine shaping you in secret, preparing you for what cannot be built on shallow ground. Remember this: roots grow in darkness, truth settles in silence, and real power is born, not in striving but in surrender. The journey continues. The man starts to notice that things which once drove him no longer hold power. The chase for recognition, applause, or validation feels strangely empty now. Where once he burned with ambition, he now feels a quieter fire, a deeper call that is less about more and more about real. He watches the world around him scramble, rushing from one task to another, endlessly chasing shadows. He sees the applause given to noise, the recognition given to appearances. And yet, he feels no desire to join the race. Something in him has shifted. Something deeper calls. Not louder, but deeper. He realizes that strength is not about appearance, not about the shape of the body, the size of the bank account, or the loudness of the voice. Real strength lives in stillness, in restraint, in the ability to sit with one's thoughts without being consumed, in the ability to feel pain without running, in the ability to stand in the fire and not beg for rain, but instead allow the flames to burn away what no longer belongs. And in this way, he begins to learn one of the hardest lessons. Absence is not always a mistake. The hollow spaces in life are often sacred. They are the soil where transformation takes root. When no one is clapping, when no one is watching, when no one affirms his worth, that is when he meets himself most honestly. The parts of himself he buried long ago begin to rise. The wounded child, the forgotten dreamer, the hopeful heart that once dared to believe. These parts resurface, not to weaken him, but to be healed. And for the first time, he does not push them away. He welcomes them. He no longer fears being misunderstood because he sees now that most of the world isn't really listening. People don't always seek truth. More often, they seek confirmation of what they already believe. And so he becomes comfortable with silence in a world that screams. He steps back while others scramble for attention. He no longer needs to convince anyone of anything. His presence is enough. His silence now speaks louder than his old words ever did. The man being shaped for power walks a path that is less crowded, less celebrated, less obvious. But it is his. And in walking it, he begins to discover a different kind of wealth, not measured in possessions but in awareness, not counted in numbers but in peace. He still lives among others, but he no longer moves with their wins. He sees the games they play, the roles they perform, the fears that drive them, and he understands. He has been there himself, but he no longer feels the need to play along. The divine has taught him through loss. By taking away what he thought he couldn't live without, he discovered the strength that was already his. By being unseen, he found the eyes that truly see. By being silenced, he uncovered the voice within, the one that doesn't shout but resonates without sound. He becomes deliberate with his energy. No longer does he say yes to every opportunity. No longer does he waste himself in every conversation. No longer does he enter every battle. He realizes not everything deserves a response. Not every door is meant to be opened. Not every fight is his to fight. Wisdom, he learns, often looks like restraint. Sometimes strength means not moving, not arguing, not proving. A man who has been remade by silence knows that stillness is not passivity. It is power under control. And yet, he does not grow bitter. He does not harden. He does not retreat behind walls. That is not what this process was for. Power without love becomes tyranny. Strength without compassion becomes cruelty. So he learns the balance, to be firm but kind, to be clear but gentle, to be grounded but still open. He moves differently now, with intention, with clarity. There's a quiet grace about him. Not because he rehearsed it, but because he has let go of the noise. He no longer seeks to impress. He seeks to embody. And that authenticity makes him magnetic, not through effort, but through presence. Pain, which once felt like punishment, has become his teacher. Loss, which once seemed unfair, has become refinement. Every wound is now a window. Every scar, a reminder that he has survived, endured, and transcended. He looks at the world and sees how much of it is asleep. How many are lost in illusions of status, performance, endless striving. And though he could point it out, he no longer tries to wake everyone. He knows awakening cannot be forced. It must be chosen. And so he simply lives. By living in truth, He becomes a quiet reminder of what is possible. True power, he realizes, is not something others give. It cannot be handed to him or taken away. It grows within. It is discovered, not granted. And once found, it cannot be destroyed by circumstance or opinion. It is rooted in something eternal. This man who was once broken, who was once unseen, who once doubted his worth, he becomes whole. Not perfect, but whole, integrated. He no longer hides from his shadow. He has made peace with it. He no longer needs to know all the answers. He has made peace with mystery. There is something almost divine about a man who no longer chases, who no longer pretends, who no longer fears being small. A man who knows that the entire sky is within him. A man who no longer runs from suffering, but walks beside it like an old companion. He will still be misunderstood. He will still be criticized. But he does not shrink. He does not lash out. He does not collapse under the weight of opinion. He understands now that not every attack requires a shield. Not every insult deserves absorption. His value is not negotiable. He knows he is not for everyone, and that is the point. He is not here to be liked. He is here to be real. And in being real, he gives others permission to do the same. He enters a room and the atmosphere shifts, not because he speaks loudly, but because his presence is anchored, rooted, alive. The man shaped by fire and silence does not cling to certainty. He welcomes the unknown. He knows life is not a puzzle to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. He no longer fights for control. In surrender, he has found peace. He no longer resists change. In acceptance, he has found flow. He no longer performs. In authenticity, he has found his voice. And when people ask him, "How did you become this way? So steady, so grounded, so unshakable?" He doesn't give them a formula. He only smiles, because he knows every man must walk his own wilderness. Every man must meet his own silence. Every man must be stripped of his illusions and face himself. No book, no teacher, no shortcut can replace that sacred journey. It is not punishment. It is preparation. It is not exile, it is initiation. He no longer prays for an easier path, he prays for alignment. He no longer seeks comfort, he seeks truth. He no longer longs to be seen, he longs to be real. And somewhere in that shift, without realizing it, he has become powerful. Not because the world approved of him, but because he no longer needed its approval at all. What is more powerful than a man with nothing left to prove? A man who has faced his own depths and returned whole no longer fears rejection, failure, or loneliness. He has already faced them, and they did not destroy him, they refined him. Now he walks with a quiet authority, not the kind that can be bought or borrowed, the kind that can only be forged, the kind that can only be felt. While the world screams for more, louder, faster, he has become the still point in the storm, the calm center of the chaos. The reminder that true power is not found in noise but in silence, not in control but in surrender, not in having but in being. He wakes not with the pressure to prove his worth, but with the quiet joy of simply being alive. The morning no longer demands he join a race he didn't sign up for. It greets him like an old friend, warm and impartial. And he receives it as it is. The urgency to compete has dissolved. The habit of comparing himself to others has faded. He knows now that peace does not come from the order of the outside world, but from surrender within. He moves slower, not from laziness, but from presence. He notices more because he is no longer rushing past life. The color of the trees, the laughter of children, the silence between words, all of it feels like poetry now. The world hasn't changed. He has. He no longer demands that life give him meaning. He meets life and meaning arises on its own. The man who has been shaped by divine intention knows suffering is not the end, it is the beginning. He remembers the nights when he could not sleep, when uncertainty weighed on him like a stone, when silence echoed louder than thunder. He remembers the days when hope felt foolish, fragile, fleeting. But he also remembers that something deep inside him never gave up. Something whispered, not in thunder, but in stillness. Stay. And he stayed. Not because he was strong, but because he surrendered. And in that surrender, he found a different kind of power. Not the power to control the world, but the power to endure. Not the power to manipulate, but the power to wait, to listen, to trust. This power did not roar, it breathed, it did not conquer, it endured, and in that endurance it overcame. He began to love differently. No longer with fear, no longer with possession, no longer with the desperate hope of being chosen. He loved freely, not to be loved back, but simply because it was in his nature to love. And in that shift, he discovered freedom. He noticed how often the world mistakes noise for confidence and speed for progress. But he had seen the truth. He had watched the loudest men tremble when silence fell. He had seen the busiest lives collapse when the applause stopped, and he knew, what is loud is often hollow. What is fast is often shallow. So he stopped chasing people who did not see him. He stopped apologizing for his depth. He stopped shrinking himself to fit shallow places. He no longer begged for belonging. He belonged to himself, but he did not grow cold. He did not close his heart. In fact, his heart opened wider than before. But now it opened with wisdom. He no longer gave himself away to be consumed. He gave from a place of overflow. He no longer allowed others to drain him. He gave in ways that multiplied, not diminished. He learned that boundaries are not walls but gates. That discernment is not judgment but wisdom. That honesty, especially with himself, is the purest form of strength. And little by little he shed the lies he once carried, the masks he once wore, the roles he once played. Like autumn leaves falling one by one until beneath them all, he found something astonishing in its simplicity, his own true face. Of course, there were still days he stumbled. Days the old fears returned. But he no longer ran. He sat with them. He learned from them. He stopped trying to kill his darkness and instead befriended it. And in doing so, he discovered wholeness. He realized humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is simply thinking of yourself less. Confidence is not loud. It is rooted. Strength is not about never crying. It is about crying when you must, and rising anyway. He no longer needed a stage to be seen. No longer needed validation to act. No longer needed noise to feel alive. He had tasted silence, and it nourished him more than applause ever could. He held pain without flinching. He held joy without clinging. He lived with intention, not for display but for truth, and in that he became rare. A man who was fully present. The path that shaped him was not convenient. It was not smooth. It was not easy. There were nights he questioned everything. Nights he screamed into the darkness wondering if anyone heard, but he sees now. It was in those very nights that he was being remade. Not a single tear was wasted. Not a single disappointment meaningless. Not a single betrayal without purpose. Every closed door redirected him. Every fall taught him to rise. With grace. Every ending pointed him to a deeper beginning. He learned that letting go is not always losing. That endings are not failures. That silence is not abandonment. He learned to trust what he could not see. To follow what he could not explain. To obey the pull within that made no sense to others, but led him home every time. He no longer prays for clarity. He prays for courage. Because clarity comes and goes, but courage remains. Clarity is a luxury. Courage is a necessity. And in choosing courage, he finds a new kind of clarity, the kind that comes from walking even when the path is hidden. His days are no longer driven by fear, but by alignment. He listens more, speaks less, acts with precision. He no longer seeks to be everywhere. He seeks only to be fully where he is. He no longer measures time by productivity, but by presence. He no longer tries to fix others. He understands now. Healing is an invitation, not an order. Transformation cannot be forced. The truth must be lived, not imposed. So he becomes the embodiment of what he once tried so hard to teach. And in simply being, he begins to change others more deeply than his words ever could. He sees beauty in what others overlook. He sees the sacred in the ordinary, a cup of tea, a quiet walk, a kind word. He understands life is not a problem to solve, but a gift to receive. And he receives it, moment by moment, with gratitude. He is no longer carried by the current, but guided by the flow. He does not resist life, he dances with it. He does not demand outcomes, he trusts the unfolding. He stops searching for a rival and embraces the journey. He knows now that true power is not domination but liberation, not control but freedom, not being admired, but being real. And in this becoming, he has not become superhuman. He has become fully human, awake, aware, alive. He is not the man he once was. He has died 1,000 small deaths, each one sacred, each one necessary. And from those deaths, something truer has been born, something unshakable. Now, when people meet him, they may not understand what they feel, but they feel it, a depth, a weight, a stillness, a peace that cannot be fabricated, a presence that requires no introduction. That is power. Not the power to impress, but the power to be. Because when life or the divine shapes a man, it does not rush. It does not shield him from the storm. It walks him through it. It does not crown him in comfort. It carves him through challenge. True power is not measured by how much he can control, but by how much he can surrender and still remain whole. The man chosen by the divine does not rise because the world lifts him up. He rises because nothing can hold him down. Not fear, not failure, not the weight of opinion, not even his own past. He becomes the man who has faced silence and kept walking, who has bled without bitterness, lost without breaking, and stood alone without losing himself. That is power, quiet, steady, eternal. So if your life feels heavy right now, if the world feels far, if all you have is your breath and the fire inside, perhaps you are not being forgotten. Perhaps you are being formed, because when life wants to make a man powerful, it does not give him the world. It gives him himself.